Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Josh Harrison, a member of the CMC Board of Trustees and President of Improving. I want to welcome our in-person audience today and just say it's truly great to see everyone right now. Today's Metro Club live streaming is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. Our forum is sponsored by The Ohio State University, Accenture, and Improving. We'd also like to thank those of you who purchased a virtual seat for today's forum. We are grateful for your continued support. You can learn more about CMC, register for events, join or renew your membership, purchase a virtual seat, or make a donation anytime at columbusmetroclub.org. Over many years, we have all become much more aware of how technology is woven through every aspect of our lives, and COVID has emphasized the critical need for all citizens to have access. Yet having access can be a dangerous proposition, as demonstrated by recent cyber attacks that raised havoc on our economy. Our panel takes a look at these trends and others shaping information technology. Please welcome Greg Jackson, Chief Operating Officer at the Office of Ohio Attorney General David Yost. Lori Kendall, Ph.D., Senior Lecturer at the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University. And Renee Cacchillo, Executive Vice President and CX Officer at Safelite Group. And our host, John Hrusovsky, President JJH Consulting. John, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I do really have, it's an honor for me to be able to have this panel up here and speak about these technology trends, because all three of these individuals have spent their careers in technology, but have also expanded their careers in a way that they can take advantage of those capabilities that they learned to have key aspects of other parts of the business that they're involved in. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about three aspects of technology: the impacts on the workforce, the impacts on business, and then impacts on society in general. So each of the speakers will take one of those topics, dive into it for a little bit, and then we'll create a little bit of a dialogue between the four of us, really the four of us, as we work our way through each of these topics, okay? And then we will have questions later on in the discussion. So the first aspect of technology that we really want to talk about is the impact on the business. And as Josh mentioned, just in the last year, the impact on the business that technology has had. Can you imagine if we didn't have Zoom to be able to conduct our business? I can't imagine that. So the impacts have been tremendous already, and they're really not, we're not anywhere close to being done from a business perspective. So what I'd like to do is ask Renee, to take a first stab at that topic. Because of her role with Safelite, it aligns very well because she's thinking about the business every day and the impacts of technology. So Renee, would you take us into that discussion?
Sure, I'd love to. So I really kind of look at the technology impacts on the business in four different ways. So really, how does it impact us financially? How does it impact the customer experience, our people's experience, and then society? And so if you go kind of around in that order, if you start with financials, I mean, technology has really helped business do a lot of things. We can make more money by serving different channels. We can shrink the size of our footprint and the space that we work in. We can work virtually. All of those things help us financially, really, in technology, and the advancements continue to help drive that great efficiency. The cybersecurity ransomware attacks, though, that can also have a big risk financially, right? And we have to really protect that and make sure that we're investing there and not just talking about it, but actually investing and coming up with what's our mitigation if something were to happen. If you shift into customer experience and you think about customers and what it means to them, they want to work with us any way they choose to work with us. And also they're consuming media and other things in so many different ways that there's ways for us to communicate with them in very different ways because of technology. I can get to them through digital television or through YouTube ad or through Instagram. We can recruit that way. It's a very different way to operate because of what technology's brought to us from a business perspective for our customers. And it really puts them in control. It's able for us to target them, but it also allows them to consume what they want to consume and how they want to work with us. Moving on to people, if you really look at it from a people perspective, it can make their jobs much more focused. It can also give them better tools and an easier way to interact. It allows us to also keep up with this generational gap as we recruit younger people into the workforce. They've had these phones and smartphones and different ways of working for quite some time. And now businesses can also offer that same technology in how we interact with our people. And we can also show a way of caring even from a remote distance and stay in touch and recruit differently, where not everyone has to go to a physical location to actually work together, but you can have great talent everywhere working together, whether virtually or physically. And then the last piece, society, it really does open up things around DEI. How can we actually be more inclusive in how we approach the work that we do? How can we also make sure that we provide safety? Things like recycling is much easier with technology, obviously. And even when you think about carbon emissions, the thing that's going to do with carbon emissions isn't just driving less, it's actually working smarter and leveraging technology to help us do that. And so really those are the 4 different dimensions that we look at when we look at how can technology help the business be more successful.
So either Greg or Lori, would you like to add in and a little bit from your perspective and what Renee has talked through?
Well, Renee, I'd be curious as to, how are you guys addressing the privacy issue, right? I mean, that's really where a lot of consumers have some concerns about, did I opt in or were I opt in involuntarily?
Right, and in fact, our business is a little complex. We work with a lot of insurance companies, and we have full integrations with them, which actually passes over PII data. And so we've had to arrange those and negotiate those with each of those carriers uniquely, and yet also provide a level that we feel good about, that as our brand and our reputation, that we can protect that. And so that's really our number one strategy as we look at it. It's around how do I protect customer data? How do I actually also protect and show that the client's data is still the client's data? It doesn't become our data. And how do we use that in a way that they're aware of how we'll use it to help their organization, but that they're knowledgeable before we go about that?
Okay. Renee, as I listened to you, I was thinking how much the role of being an employee changes when we talk about technology. And so as you look at the redesign or transformation of your business or the challenge that CIOs have and how they transform their businesses, what span of control or degrees of freedom will employees get increasingly or not by the flexible arrangements of working that may be remote?
Yeah, that's a interesting one, because I think then there's also the component of great leadership. And the question I think we still don't all know the answer to is, can you have great leadership only virtually? And I believe the answer can be yes, but again, back to the span piece. It takes a while to get to know people, to have them really feel that you're engaged, that you care about them, that you actually want to help them develop in their career, that when they're with you, they're going to be more marketable. And it's really hard to do that without a human touch. And yet at the same time, if you're the most talented and right candidate for the job, regardless of where you live or work, if you can be effective virtually, we'd want you on our team. So it is, I think, a new territory that we're all evolving through. I don't think traditional spans of control are going to work anymore, because you can't just walk the floor. That used to be the thing, walk the floor, know your people. And I think that horizontal way of working is much more challenging in a virtual world than it was in a physical world. And vertical is pretty easy, that functional line, but when you really have to go cross-functional and collaborative, that's much harder.
So Renee, talk a little bit about, you went from a technology role, right, to now more into a business role, and talk about how technology is moving from being tactically looked upon from a company perspective to strategically looked upon.
Yeah, I mean, the role of the CIO at Safelite, for instance, was always under the CFO for a very, very long time. And then they basically put it inside of the business. They felt that a financial lens wasn't the right lens any longer for us to deliver on our customer experience strategy. And we wanted it to come forefront and be part of the senior leadership team, where it actually understood all of the dilemmas and all of the dynamics of running the entire business, whether it's our field organization, our contact center, our client relationships. And by moving the CIO role more front and center into that, it actually helped us understand technology at a more strategic level from a business perspective, but it also really made technology part of the business, if that makes sense.
Sure does. Great, thanks. One other question I have. So you mentioned the cyber attacks, right? And not getting into the weeds on it, but what are some of the, the ways your organization is? I mean, I got to imagine there's a lot of vulnerabilities. Not vulnerability, I mean, opportunities. Maybe that's a better way to say it. And so just talk a little bit about it from that way, because I don't want anyone to think that Safelite is vulnerable. Let me be clear.
Thanks, John.
Yeah. There's a reason why I'm up here, Renee, let me tell you.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a lot in this area. So, when you think about digital and what's all going through online, that we actually never even see a person. People were so afraid of digital fraud. That hasn't been our biggest issue. It's really around building the foundation, teaching our people what to look for, helping make sure that when we design systems, that we design them with security in mind and not as an afterthought. And as we start to go through more of a system transformation, updating some of our older systems, it's really how do we maintain what we currently have and keep it protected, but also how do we build in with the new future, especially SaaS-based models, where you don't control everything. What does that look like? How do you actually make sure that you understand how the security work and what protection will take place? So we do a lot of phishing tests. We do some other kinds of education. We do catch the same people over and over sometimes, and we politely let them know. But it is one of those things that we're learning, and I have to say we're making great progress. We've also hired external firms to go out and search and hunt and see what they can do, as well as pen tests, internal and external pen tests that we do on a regular basis. So we've really enhanced the way that we talk about security, and actually security is on every month's SLT agenda as the first topic of the day.
That's a change.
It's a big change.
Yeah, big change. Very good. Okay, so we're gonna move into, and Greg is gonna kind of introduce this topic and talk a little bit about it. And this is really the impact on the workforce. And when we think of the workforce, we think of it from the non-IT perspective and then the IT perspective. Now, the majority of, I think as Greg talks through this, will probably be more focused on the non-IT workforce, because a lot of the IT folks, we're kind of there as it relates to that. So Greg, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Thank you, John, and thank you for having me. When it comes to the trends of technology in the workforce, I think one of the first questions a lot of us ask are robots going to take my job or going to take over my role? And I think that the real answer is it depends. It depends on what role you're providing and where your value is in the supply chain. Because the real challenge and the real goal is to remove the robot out of the person, right? So we want to get all of those types of tasks that are very repetitive, very non-value add in some respects, out of individual cost and really shift those to an automated mechanism instead. And so, it depends on where you are in that value chain. And I'll give you an example. I recently purchased a new car, and I had to sign up for my first tire rotation. So I go on the app, and I schedule for my tire rotation. And as all of you know, you have to plan for 30 minutes to get there, probably an hour for them to perform the service, and another 30 minutes coming back home. So I scheduled for my tire rotation, and 30 minutes later, I get a notification back that says, your on-site tire rotation has been canceled, and instead we're going to move you to mobile service. Do you accept? And I'm thinking, mobile service? What, are you coming to my house now? And they're like, well, yeah, they want to come to my house or my place of business and perform that tire rotation. And so when the technician showed up, I asked, how do you like this? Do you like, going around? He said, I love it. I love it. I don't have to be in the shop. I want to get out and engage with the customers. I never got to talk to the customers whose cars I was working on before. Now I can engage with the customer. I get a better sense of what their experience is. And I thought to myself, but the person that got left out of this whole transaction was the service advisor or the service manager, right? That person's not involved in this transaction. And that's an example of a trend where in a tire rotation, the service advisor had added very little value to that entire service delivery aspect. And so that's why I say it depends. But that doesn't mean they don't need service advisors. It means they probably need less of them. But it also means that service provider is now going to work on more challenging types of tasks where customers need more complicated, experiences or things that they have to deal with providing service to their vehicle. So it elevated that role of that service advisor to really deal with things that were more complex as opposed to things that were more simplistic and routine. And so depends on where you are in the chain, so it can impact you, but the goal is to reduce costs and to get the middleman out as much as possible where they don't add value. So that's kind of the downside of the trend, but there's an upside of the trend too that I think we don't pay enough attention to. And I would say that in the last 100 years, probably most of the jobs that we have today, or a lot of you in the room or even online, probably didn't exist 100 years ago. If you go back to 1921, did the job that you perform today actually exist in the year 1921? And I would bet a large majority that probably did not exist, right? So I was kind of curious, and I went out to, I think the website was career.addict, and just looked at what are the number of new occupations and new roles that have been created just in the last 10 years alone, right, that didn't previously exist. So when you look at trends in technology, yes, there's the side of can automation reduce and eliminate jobs, but there's also this need that we have as a society to continue to reinvent ourselves and create new roles and new jobs. So just a few of the new jobs that I came across that didn't exist 10 years ago. Driverless car engineer did not exist 10 years ago. Social media influencers did not exist 10 years ago. A blockchain analyst to help companies to now invest in cryptocurrency and understand how to play into that world. As you probably all know, Uber and Lyft drivers far outnumber taxi drivers that we've had in the past. Drone operators, people who actually are in the real estate area or media use drones quite a bit. We actually use drones in the Ohio Turnpike to inspect bridges. So the use of drones is becoming much more prevalent, and that's a brand new occupation. But here's one that really caught my attention, the one called bud tender, B-U-D tender. So think of a bartender. So now in the cannabis dispensaries, there are bud tenders now that actually can help you navigate through, what you need and how much you need and how it's going to impact
What does
what
that
you
have to
need.
do with technology?
But it's an example of, their fear of technology taking away jobs and the fact that we're going to reinvent ourselves as we move along going forward as well. So, yeah, there's a bit of a displacement, but there's also new occupations on the horizon as well. So I'm trying to dispel the fear that people have around the trends of technology and whether, is a robot going to replace my job?
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I want to turn it over to Lori and Renee to add on to what Greg just went through. Thank you, Greg.
Greg, I have a question for you. By the way, I loved removing the robot out of the person. That's such a cool idea because mechanization of the 20th century robbed a lot of human dignity and autonomy to make independent decisions on what's the best way to do my job. We've in fact done great harm in that. So as you kind of look forward and say, by removing the robot out of the person, where do you see the next wave of job roles and opportunities coming down the horizon?
Yeah, I think it's, I think we're probably going to see much more trend toward more artistic and capabilities that, automation really can't lend itself to as easily. So I think in those roles, we're going to see an increase in those types of occupations. People are going to be probably a little freer to be more creative in a lot of those types of roles as well going forward. But I also would say that, it gives, there's a couple of people that make this comparison as well, that, you either have a job, a career, or something you're really passionate about, right? It tends to be the kind of the spectrums you work within. I think it will push people from just having a job to really focusing on a career or their passion and leave the job to more automation and things that are more repetitive.
My question is, I hear about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we've started to dabble in some of those areas. But when I look at the workforce, I always think about, so what's it going to look like in 5 years? Like, will they be able to make decisions faster? Will they be able to have insights more clearly? Will it make everyone a commodity, or will it still the great brains will stand out and the technology will just enable it? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think when it comes to AI, especially with the bots and especially the emphasis that a lot of companies have had on really placing robotics and bot technology in customer service, I think if it's done well, it could have the right experience for both the customer and the company. But if it's done poorly, you're going to get a lot of pushback from the customers, right? I think most of us realize now that if you go on a website and you're asked to chat, you're not chatting with the person, right? That's the likelihood you're chatting with the person is probably 10%. And so the effectiveness and how well you get to the answer of what you're asking for is going to play pretty significantly on, is this effective or is this causing frustration, right? And depending on what it is that you're delivering, you're going to get that feedback from customers pretty readily on, I did not get the service I was expecting. And I think if the company is measuring when a person calls in, are they immediately going to representative, right away that there's something that's not effective.
Yeah. Very true.
Greg, I have a question for you. So in your current role, you have, I would imagine you have some, less experience, maybe younger individuals in the organization, and more experience, maybe, older. So I've always found in large organizations, it's a challenge to leverage technology, because you may have some folks that want to push and other folks that don't want to be pushed. So how do you deal with that on a daily basis?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been a big advocate for, we've done this at the Attorney General's office and also in other agencies as well, is the adoption of technology has to come readily. You can't really force it on people. And so what we've done on the business side is to really ask for a champion. There has to be someone on the business side of the organization that's going to champion this new innovation or this new initiative or this new technology. It cannot be driven by IT. And so if you get someone on the business side that I'm going to champion, I'm going to make sure the business understands how it's going to impact, I'm going to be the listener or the ear of the business to know, as you get deeper in the organization, what people's perceptions are and whether this is acceptable and what their concerns are, and more importantly, how to mitigate those. You get better buy-in. I've been a big advocate of change management concepts for a long time now, especially in IT, where you really have to keep measuring people's acceptance on technology and what their concerns are, and have plans to mitigate those as you go along. And sometimes you can speed up and sometimes you have to slow down based upon those concerns.
That's awesome. That's how I met Renee. Renee and I go back. We both worked at Accenture years ago. I was on the system side, slamming in systems, and she was on the change management side saying, hey, if we don't do this the right way, those systems aren't going to be accepted. So we learned that a long time ago. I'm glad you brought that up, Greg. Let's go into the third topic here, which is the impact on the society. Just a broader topic as it relates to the impacts. And I can't think of any better person to do it than a professor from Ohio State that spends her time thinking about these things and teaching. So, Lori, you're up.
I'm glad I spent 30 years in industry before going to the academy to at least keep it real. Otherwise, the ivory tower can be a little disconnecting. I want to start by just observing one of the last things that Greg said when he talked about change management, because it goes to the heart of the accelerating cycles we see in the rates of adoption. Innovation used to play out over a couple of decades, and we would call that punctuated equilibrium. In other words, you'd introduce a technology, people would freak out, and then over the next 10 to 20 years, they'd figure out how to use it. Right? That's the less polite way of talking about what happens to us as human beings. But now, innovation cycles are accelerating and are playing out in 3 to 5 years. at least in terms of comparative advantage for a business, at least in terms of technology that's available for sale at the Consumer Electronics Show, the new products, the cycle times. You're now supposed to replace your phone every couple of years, and every time you pick up a new phone, you say, I'm not sure I can figure out how to interact with this one. We're firmly ensconced in what we call the fourth wave of industrialization, and this is a term coined by the World Economic Forum. Because of AI, because of the changes in technology that are forcing us to redefine work, where we take the robots out of the people function, we have to consider a couple of main ideas. One is that 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. And it's getting super expensive for people to deal with. Do you want to be the data analysts at Safelite or in the governor's office trying to wade through zettabytes that are generated, which is a factor way beyond terabytes? I think we're pushing back on that because what we're finding is misleading misinformation is making us crazy as a society. And this is one of the unintended side effects of technology. And so I think we will see a trend in businesses and individuals in how we consume information and how we use information in our businesses, where we're going to say we kind of need a return to what's authentic and what I can trust. Because a pile of data that I can't be informed by isn't worth much and is garbage in, garbage out. The second thing in technology and society, the two more themes I want to very lightly touch on, is I want to touch on privacy. You know, here in the United States, we're a patchwork quilt of privacy laws. There are 2 states in the entire country that have something that mirror GDPR, which is a European standard for the right to be forgotten. The right for privacy in how you interact in the public space. Here in the United States, there are 2 states, one of them is California, that have a GDPR type of policy. We don't have such policy in most of the states. It dies in committee, if it's considered at all, by the states. Now, you as a citizen in society, you ought to have a say in that. You ought to care about that. Because your information is being used to commoditize you and make you the product. You're the product in technology today. That's the truth. And I don't know about you, but I'm not always comfortable being a product. I'm young enough to be digitally native. I'm old enough to remember a time when it was analog. And I think most of the people in this room, that's true for you. Yeah? Most of our audience, I think that's probably true for you. The last thing I want to talk about is that AI is going to mature going beyond a discrete computer-based automation type of system that we use to make decisions, decision-making under uncertainty, where it's going to fly our planes, not going to just drive our cars. It's going to be used like it's used at Rice University today to make very complex radiological diagnoses of cancer. And what happens if this technology doesn't get it right? What happens to our liability laws? What happens to malpractice laws? Who's at fault when the technology is the one that makes the mistake and not the human error? If a plane crashes and there's nobody in the cockpit, is the pilot still wrong? What happens next is what we and you decide should happen. And it will take foresight and courage to take a legal, moral, and public policy framework and a private business framework, ultimately, in how we operate in this public and private space in technology. And meanwhile, technology, the waves of technology innovation are going to continue and are going to accelerate. Moore's law is accelerating. So we should probably choose wisely, or we may show up in a future science fiction dystopian novel that may mirror what we have today.
Good.
Just to kick it off.
It's very hard to have a professor not do a little bit of lecturing.
I know, sorry.
It's all good. It's great. I love it. All right.
Did 4 minutes, though.
No, you did perfect. Greg and Renee, any questions on your end or any comments, thoughts?
I'll chime in a little bit. I mean, when you look at consumer behavior on that one, Lori, it's like, I see my children who will give their data to anyone to get something fast, right? And so they're a very different generation. They're 20, by the way. They aren't 5. And so they're smart enough to know better. But then again, at the same time, like, how many people in this room have a Nest? I'm going to track everybody who comes to my door, tries to rip off my package. I'll give you any data you want. And so I think there's also an American public thing where we're much more open to, if it's good for me, it's good for me, even if I don't realize you took my data. And so there is a difference of an American spirit versus what I feel, because I deal with GDPR quite a bit in the European groups, and they have a very different sense of privacy and what's okay and what's not okay. So I think we as an American society also need to think through, when is it good to give our data and when is it not good to give our data? And I think we make some naive decisions potentially, but also ones that are personal choice. And I don't know that we want all of that dictated. So I think it's a kind of a big dilemma, right? So I don't know, how do you wrestle that to the ground? And is everywhere in the world supposed to be the same, completely locked down, or are there differences by culture and societal preferences and those types of things?
Fair enough. That's a great comment. You know, we are individualistic. We are by far the most individualistic nation, sovereign country in the world. And that means that we make very different decisions than GDPR, and I get that. But right now, the conversation is implicit rather than explicit. And I think from a society perspective, this should be an explicit conversation. And we should be able to at least dial in tune for the things that we own and possess, how much of our information, and at what point do we want to pull it back. At least to have our explicit say-so. And I think that's Renee, that's really right on.
Good.
So Lori, I kind of question, I had an experience with a state agency where we were collecting a lot of data, and I was asking the question, so what are we going to do with it, right? And there was not a lot of answers. Like, we're collecting it because we have to. So I'm curious about your example of 95% of the data in the last 2 years. Do you have a sense of how or what it's going to be used for, or are we just collecting it because it's there?
That's exactly the problem, right? We're collecting that 90% of the world's data has existed in the last 2 years. It's just because we're collecting it everywhere. And I think it's data, it's not information. And that's the problem. Again, if I'm a business person, that's the problem. What do I do with this pile of stuff? And I think that we in business and universities, governments, how long do you keep your tax records at home? I mean, this is a massive scale of that. We have to be thoughtful and more selective, because right now we're paying for vast amounts of round brown things or solid state things that don't spin to store it, and we can't do anything with it.
So Laura, I have a question for you related to kind of a societal question. And it's similar to the question I asked Greg from a workforce, but from the society perspective, how do we really address that digital gap between generations, right? And like a good example, right? I'm the youngest. I have some older siblings, and one of my older siblings just doesn't like the computer too well, right? So when she was going through her vaccine process, it was a challenge, right? And that's just one simple example, right? So how to, just from a societal perspective, how do we continue to address, or how do we effectively address that?
Mm-hmm. I think the way that we teach has to change. And the way that we educate ourselves and remain lifelong learners. It's a term that we throw around in the academy quite a bit because it's become increasingly relevant, that it's not enough to get your degree and then that's it, and you're done. Our world's changing too quickly. And so therefore, my sister uses YouTube videos. She's almost 80 years old, right? We have a very spread out family, as you do. I'm the baby. And She uses YouTube videos to figure out how to do stuff. And frankly, there's Coursera, there are online academies, there's the Khan Academy, that it's never too late to find somebody to see one, do one, teach one, find a way that we can be curious and involved and don't have to take a semester of classes, don't have to get another degree, don't have to take a year's program or a bunch of prerequisites to basically learn how to do stuff. That's what free online education is teaching us, is that you can offer very targeted ways. We sponsor, in a faith congregation that I'm a part of, we sponsor periodic learning sessions on how to use social media. We had to train people how to use social media, how to use Zoom, how to TikTok. And I think what you find are those 5 to 7 minute videos that really break it down, that are of high quality, can do a lot. But to overcome that reticence, to overcome that barrier to being frightened, first of all, we have to sort of take a breath and say, if the technology is designed well, it's designed to serve us, not we it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. We're gonna move to questions in a minute. I'm gonna ask one final question for the group, though. But I will say that I use YouTube a lot as well. I have a Big Green Egg, which is a smoker. All of my recipes come from that YouTube channel. I check them out. I follow along. It's perfect. It's great. That has nothing to do with technology, but I thought I'd tell you anyway.
It's great, though.
All right. Very good. All right. So the last question, and they don't know this question's coming. And I would like for each of you to answer it, and you can decide how you want to go. Renee's like, I'm leaving right now. Man, I'm out the door. But would you have paid the ransom that the Colonial Pipeline paid? Would you have done that? I know it's more theoretical, but I'll start with the professor.
Yep. Yeah, I would have paid the ransom.
And why?
Because if I'm completely locked out of being able to run my business, and it's costing me X millions of dollars a minute to be locked out, honestly, at the end of the day, what choice do I have? And it becomes a pure cost-benefit trade-off analysis. And I would like to say that I wouldn't be so pure. I would like, so impure. I'd like to say, oh, no, I'm a woman of principle, and we would never stoop to paying off kidnappers. But you know, if I'd pay a ransom for somebody that I loved, I have a business that I owe my shareholders and my stakeholders and my customers, I'd get the FBI involved, and we'd go follow that money the best way we could, but I'd pay the ransom.
Helpful. Greg?
I think I would have to have the information first to make that decision. First of all, I would want to know what happened to my disaster recovery efforts, because that was supposed to kick in, right? If my systems are all locked out, had it been through hacking or intrusion, or it had it been an earthquake or natural disaster, I'm down. Where's my recovery efforts? If the answer is we haven't tested it, it hasn't worked, we never tested it, then I'm going to be forced to pay the ransom, right? But if the answer is yes, we have it, it's not optimal, I can get us back up and running in 30 days or less, or 2 weeks or less, or depending on what that time frame is, I may say, maybe I can, tough it out. So I think it depends on the situation, and I hopefully this is a wake-up call for those who haven't been putting an eye toward their disaster recovery efforts and making sure that that stuff can come back when needed. Because I think you're going to be forced to pay if you don't have a recovery effort in place.
Very good. Renee?
I too would pay the ransom for very similar reasons, customers and making sure that the business continued to operate. I also believe, though, that now that we've seen 2 of these attacks, it's time for us as business leaders to not only unite on this topic, but also to help prevent it in our own businesses. We can't just sit and hope it doesn't happen to us. We have to find a way to actually really criminally prosecute and punish when found as well, and find out how to capture the ransomers. So.
Very good, thank you. And again, I wanted to bring that up because it's a relevant topic now, but it's a tough discussion, right, to have. I will say this, and then we'll take questions. One of my clients, they're not a client anymore, but we worked with them for a while, Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, and they are the most attacked organization in the world. And they are because, for not the government, but from a private perspective, and it's because they have a reputation of being the most protected, high-end cybersecurity. So all the hackers, they get about 1 million, this was 5 years ago, they get about 1 million attacks a day. And I can't imagine being in that world where you're just being constantly attacked from hackers and so forth. Okay, that was a little advertisement for Carnegie Mellon. No. All right, so in the tradition of the CMC, we will take audience questions. Lainey Cuthbert is going to be taking the questions both from a live stream perspective as well as from the live audience here. And so if you do end up asking a question, you all know the rules that keep them brief. And we'll have long answers. So, no, I'm just joking. But anyway, go ahead. You're up.
John Christinger at Ohio State Newark branch. He asks, how do we keep equitable and inclusive technological participation among all groups when the technology is evolving at the blink of an eye and outdatedness is always a moment away?
Who would like to take that first?
I'll take it.
All right, Lori's got it.
I got the side glance from Greg. I just do what Greg says. I think we as a society, I think we as communities, and we as different communities, different cities, different townships, counties, and state, as well as groups, we get to decide how much we want to bring people along. And inequality, and you can have a digital divide, you can have a socioeconomic divide, you can have access to learning opportunities divide. Technology is just one more divide. And so as though we make decisions about how are we going to make sure that those of us who are from disadvantaged neighborhoods get a quality education, so we also have to answer, how do we make sure that people that may be the first in their household to go to college, how do we make sure that we set them up for success and make sure that they have access to the digital technologies that they need, and that when they graduate, they have the sophistication and the awareness and the knowledge about how to stay current. We have to do the same for high school students. We have to do the same for junior high students. We have to do the same for elementary school students. We have to do the same for students in Head Start. That technology is now so integrated and embedded, and it can be such a helpful tool to everything that we do in education. It is part of that educational cost. That's how I'd answer it.
Greg, Renee, want to add on at all?
I'd like to add just a bit. One of the things I think we have to keep in perspective too is that we are a representative government. A lot of the states are represented, republics of or commonwealths of, but we are a representative government. And I think that if you feel that you are not represented, then you need to speak up and you need to say something, and you need to make sure that you're not getting lost, in the crowd. There's legislation right now being debated in the legislature about broadband. Are we going to do this or not across the state? For those areas that are not feeling very well represented, they need to speak up. They need to say something. You are being represented, and so this is being silent is probably not the option that you want to choose to overcome that question.
Yes, I think we're. Renee?
Yeah, I'll just chime in really quickly from a business perspective. I mean, you're going to have consumers of all different ages and all different demographic backgrounds. So just because you make technology advancements doesn't mean that you can't still work with them in a way that they're comfortable, whether you offer voice or you explain how the process is going to work. Break it down and remember who your customer base is, and don't alienate them because you want to get to the next greatest technology advancement.
Can I add one more
Sure.
thing to Greg's point? It also leverages Renee. When we went online with the pandemic, and I found myself with 600 students in my undergraduate courses. About 1/5 of them are from the rural parts of Ohio that don't have access to broadband. And we had to figure out, how do we serve these kids? They're smart. They got into the Ohio State University. They're committed to getting an education. How do we serve them? Which means we need to make decisions and make sure that in our representation, to Greg's point, that we're serving all of Ohioans and that all of Ohio has access, broadband access. It's unconscionable that there are parts of Ohio that don't. Unconscionable that my kids had to break curfew, had to break the law to go to an aunt's house or a grandmother's house 100 miles away to get access to broadband so they could attend class. What does that say about us?
Very good. That's eye-opening. Think about it.
Yeah, my name is Steve Gravenkemper, and I'm a psychologist. And my question is around teamwork and collaboration. So what makes you excited about the capabilities of technology, makes you optimistic in terms of improving teamwork and collaboration? And what may be some of the challenges you see as we move increasingly to virtual and hybrid teams?
Who wants to take this one first?
I can take it. I'll start out. You know, one of the things that I think the pandemic did is really accelerate our need to use technology for teamwork and collaboration. In our organization, we stood up teams. We were planning to stand it up, but it accelerated our need to stand it up sooner and faster. And in doing that, it had all the tools and capabilities, but, we were slow to actually bring people up to speed on how to use it. So it gets back to the change management aspect again of, the tools are all there, the collaboration tools are all there, but really navigating people through how to use the tool to become collaborative in a virtual world is part of the puzzle that can't be left, unsolved. And so I think that more emphasis on making people comfortable with the technology, how to use the technology, and how the collaboration can occur with the tools that are available today is part of the answer to that.
Yeah, and I mentioned earlier, just to add on to that point, I made a comment about working vertically versus working horizontally. And what we found when we moved to a virtual work environment or even a hybrid work environment, it's easy to have people in multiple places on multiple types of technology or in person and some online, and you're working in your function. It's really challenging when you go across, and so then you have to also invest, personal opinion here, you have to invest in other tools that help you work virtually that way. So if you're going to collaborate, you need collaboration boards. It's like taking the whiteboard from the room and sticking it online, right? And how do you actually innovate in a way, if you're aware that you're going to stay or hybrid or have some online or all online, that you still then invest in those additional tools to make that possible versus thinking you're going to be able to do it just with a one-dimension virtual experience.
Okay. Next question.
This is from Patrick Johnson at Vista Research Services. He asks, do you have any insights or thoughts about the viability of quantum computers in the future?
Lori, it's your turn. You're the society.
I am in love with what quantum technology is going to do for us from a computing perspective. It will allow us to solve some problems that we simply can't solve today. We just don't have enough cycles, clock speed of the fastest computer. Quantum, however, introduces some really interesting problems and some really interesting challenges, not only from the way that you code and you program it, but from a way that you manage it, from the way that you access it, and from a way that you secure it. But for me, quantum technology is going to benefit cloud computing, is going to benefit the stuff that we share that's sort of a public good, Amazon Web Services, Google, the people that host stuff on our behalf will allow capabilities and allow the solving of problems that are very difficult to do in research contexts. How we approach and how we deconstruct the genome, how we look at targeted gene therapies for cancer. All of those are, from a technology perspective, greatly enhanced by quantum computing. So I would look for those big bangs first before I would say, hey, how does it affect us as individuals when we're trying to reconcile our checkbooks at the end of the month?
And I have a different perspective on quantum. I'm excited about the technology, but I'm also very fearful of the technology when it comes to security, because I think it's going to wreak havoc on our security, or today's security mechanisms that we use to protect data. It's going to create a whole new level of need to figure out how we're going to secure data going forward with quantum capabilities readily available, when it is readily available, which it won't be for a while. But when quantum is readily available, we're going to have to move to a whole new level of security in order to combat that technology and that capability. So there's going to be a whole new sea change coming in security once quantum comes to fruition.
It'll crack blockchains.
Yes, yeah. I mean, once it cracks blockchains, then what's next beyond blockchain?
So we're going to have a new career. There'll be some new careers coming
Yeah,
out of that,
exactly.
right? Bud
security.
chain blockers. Or blockers, whatever. All right, Renee, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I'm
Okay,
good.
we're good. All right, next question.
All right, Bill Lafayette from Regionomics asks, are there organizations addressing e-waste?
Who would like to take? What?
We have not
Renee,
talked
but
about
Renee, all right,
e-waste
Renee,
yet.
you
Yeah,
got
I'll
it.
start. We have not talked about e-waste. We are back to what Lori was talking about. We're struggling with even just what data do you keep, how much do you keep, and then back to Greg, how much do you store, how long do you store it for, what do you do with all of this? So we're still there. We have not started to address e-waste yet.
Yeah, I will say that's a great question. One of the things I was surprised, I'm a Google user because I have to be practically, but one of the things that they provided, which this is the first time I've seen this in any of the providers out there so far, is they have a portion on your site, on their site, for your account to actually, for you to tell them, what do you want to do with your data after you pass? Who has access to it? Who do you want to have access to it? For how long? And so they at least have thought about it and have started giving you access to make decisions on who can have access to my Google accounts, which accounts, YouTube versus Gmail versus whatever, and for how long, and can they assume all the data, or do they have a window of opportunity to make decisions? I thought that was fantastic. That was the first time I ever saw anyone actually try to address that issue about what do we do with all this data when a person's no longer here, and who owns it?
Yeah, I'll add on real quick, because I have my own business, and actually my wife works with me on some aspects of it. And we don't call it e-waste, but she's a CPA by trade, and so she's very focused on what do we keep, what do we don't keep, how long do we keep it, and not just across our tax, but any information related to the business. And I do think that some businesses do get themselves in trouble when they don't do that, have a whole program around that. And you're right, because there's so much data being developed, I mean, e-waste will become more of an issue than physical waste over time. Okay, I think we have one more question. Is that correct? Yeah, one more.
Okay, so along the lines of what you were talking about with being able to choose who has access to my information and everything, we had a couple questions, which were, how do I wipe my information off of the internet?
Good luck on that. That's not easy to do, especially when it's, I have a client of mine that, I'll jump in on this one. I have a client of mine that had some really unfortunate false information put about him on the internet. And we finally got it. I mean, it took a lot of work, and it cost him a lot of money. I had to get lawyers involved in it, and so I'm not answering a question. I'll turn that over to the panel. But it's a challenge when with that information that's out there. So who would like to jump on that one first?
I think that's going to be another one of those new occupational areas, right, for someone to dive into and say, I do this for you. I can help get you off the net, or I can help, erase your digital presence. And actually, I've seen some of that being advertised where people will go in and help you. It's more along the lines of, your personal integrity, but also in the areas of, I just don't want to be on there anymore. And so I think that's going to be an area of, that's ripe for growth of people that specialize just in that practice.
It's very difficult to do today. Your big sources of information, Google, of course, sells your information. So even if you delete all of your information with Google and say, I'm going to delete my existence on Google, whatever you did up until that point using a search engine has been known and packaged up and sold about you. You have to do the same on each one of the social media platforms. Facebook does give you the ability to delete your identity on Facebook. Google does. A lot of the major social media search engines have the ability to do that. You can also unsubscribe and delete yourself on every account that you've ever owned. But just as Greg said, it's you doing the work to unsubscribe and delete yourself, and then continually emptying your cache, getting rid of the junk, the cookies, all the stuff that you've collected. And then you might as well uninstall any software package you have. You might as well uninstall and stop using computers, stop using smartphones, because every one of those is leaving a digital footprint.
Well, we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to turn it over to Josh.
I hope you found today's forum interesting. We probably could have gone an hour deep on any one of those topics, everything from blockchain to bud dealer. But in all seriousness, I appreciate how the panel took such complex topics and presented it in an accessible way, so thank you. Make plans now to join us in person or online next week as CMC features Smart Columbus Future Forward. Thanks to our sponsors today, The Ohio State University, Accenture, and Improving. Our thanks also goes out to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. And thank you to our online virtual seat patrons. And a special appreciation and a thanks to our speakers, Greg Jackson, Lori Kendall, Renee Cacchillo, and our host, John Hrusovsky. Thank you all for joining us. We could not do this without you. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday as CMC reconvenes the community conversation. Thank you.